all can see it, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So, hello everyone, this is Erkin Ergüne. I'm going to give you today an economic approach to the COVID-19 crisis. I'll go on quick. So first, what I can give you, what insights I can give you is like life during the outbreak and how it was in China. This time, at the moment I'm in Turkey because I had to come back to my country. This is the second time I'm living through the virus panic. And to be honest, it's much more easier than the first time because now I know what to expect and so on. So first on, let me tell you a little bit about what I lived through in China. So first on, when we learned about the virus, first on, there was panic and closures. Shops were closing down and people were panicking, hoarding food, etc. And something that we don't have much in Europe was distrust towards the data that Chinese government was giving. And because Chinese government during the SARS crisis in 2002 and 3, they were known to hide some data. So there was also, both from the public in China and internationally, there was a distrust, and also that was affecting our lives as well. There was also draconian measures, a little in the opposite direction of Europe, at least initially. There was wide measures implemented, especially in Hubei province. And there was also a lot of disinformation. Also, I would say European friends at the moment living through this crisis also have been experiencing this, I think, especially through social media. There has been a lot of disinformation flowing, like people falling off on the streets and stuff like that. Like for example, I received a video before in Shanghai Metro, there was a guy falling down and it turned out that guy was just drunk. But in the end, people were panicking all the same. And a difference in what you have been living through and what the people in China lived through was that this, when it was found in China, this was a novel virus. So we did not know how much of its death rate, kill rate would be, mortality, how much mortality would be, etc. So people were just like expecting the worst. People did not know how much the transmission rate was, what the R naught, the infection rate was, and how much of a mortality rate the virus possessed. So it was overall a look down the abyss. I'll keep on with the solution because you already know. I guess almost everyone in this group, in this chat, has been experiencing the crisis somewhat. So I'll go on with the state intervention as the solution and what the countries did. So overall, there are 3 different approaches to disease control as I could identify. So China, Korea, and the UK are the exemplars of these strategies. First, the mass quarantine. Are we locking down entire cities and populations or not? In China, yes, they have done that in Hubei province and especially in Wuhan city. In Korea, they have not, and they have instead used the different measures. And also in the UK, no. Also, I should add, UK strategy has been changing due to the public pressure, but we will come to that later. And in terms of testing, China has been relying on testing at medical centers and testing mostly towards people who show symptoms and showing extreme symptoms. This is also the widest used technique in Europe as well as in Italy, in Spain, and so on. In Korea, they have done something like drive-through testing. You would drive your car to a testing spot and you would not have to step out of your car. You would take some swabs. They would take some swabs and take some samples from your mouth and your nose, and in 24 hours you get an SMS. This was not very effective in stopping the infection or helping the infected person, but it was very helpful in stopping the infection from spreading, as you could trace their contacts and quarantine them if necessary. And in UK, they were less reliant on tests, but now also it has been changing every passing day. And the third aspect is isolation. China had a reliance on hospitals. As you know, they constructed 2 hospitals in a course of, I think, 14 days or so. Korea mostly depended on home isolation. People were told to isolate themselves at home and not to overwhelm the health system, and also stop the infection in the hospitals, because from the SARS epidemic, we had this experience of hospitals becoming hotspots for infections. UK also depends on home isolation, at least until now. And the stance against the virus in China was very aggressive. Government took sometimes very unnecessary steps at stopping the virus. For example, in many provinces that have not been affected by the virus at all, there has been some draconian measures that made the public a little annoyed to with the measures. But overall, the state response has been very aggressive. In Korea, it was proactive. They were acting before it impacted the society. But in the UK, at least the proposed strategy of herd immunity was somewhat passive stance. And of course, there comes to the point of very practical matters. Can these countries build 2 hospitals in 10 days? China can and did. Korea, maybe it could, but it did not put that into the strategy, and UK didn't. And something I can add in with the UK's strategy, it has been getting a lot of criticisms, but I would like to add that we have seen Hubei and China recovering from, at least not recovering totally, but at least stopping the transmission dynamics of the outbreak. However, as we need to think scientifically, we do not know how much of the transmission stopping in Hubei had to do with quarantine measures or herd immunity. As you know, as you also heard, this disease is very transmissible, and we cannot isolate the effects of quarantine with the effects of herd immunity. So the question is, did so many people in Hubei get infected and got through the sickness, so they developed some sort of herd immunity, and this just coincided measures with China, so that now we're seeing a reduction in transmission in Hubei. So I would like to add at least a grain of salt what you've been hearing from the media. I think UK strategy before also had some scientific merit, but that's another topic. So the economic reaction, how did people react to this crisis? So we have seen mass panic, as you can all relate, I guess. Closures of commercial activity, shops have been closing, markets have been hoarded, and lower demand towards consumer products, not to toilet paper, not to disinfectants or masks, but other stuff like TVs, cars, and other economic entities that usually contribute to our growth. So you can see the mass panic from the indices. This is from Financial Times. I updated it yesterday. I don't know the graph today. I don't think it's very different. You have seen a massive drop in the international indices. This has been impacting the global economy very adversely. Actually, especially for developing nations, ever since, so a new market class was created in 1988 for developing countries and to follow their economies. And ever since that was created, never has there been a worse year, worse start of the year apart from this. So developing countries, along with all the global markets, are affected very badly. And we are seeing a small jump, as you can see in the last day. That is the markets reacting to the boost package, the stimuli packages announced by the Fed and the global and other central banks. But we will see if that theme is to persist. I don't think it will. And closures, as you can see, deserted street in Rome. Retail sector has been very hardly hit because people, of course, have not been going to the high streets or shopping malls, and they're closed if they go anyway. And there are a lot of data coming in, not from Europe, but from China, which I will show now due to lower demand. This is PMI data. PMI is a sort of measurement index to measure how much people are having trust into the economy and are going on as normally with their spending decisions. We haven't gotten this data yet from Europe because it has only been recently that Europe has been living through the full swing of this virus crisis. So, but in China, this has been going on since January, so we had the data, and it is not looking bright, I can tell you. So you can see in January 2020, it was 51.9. If it's above the 50 benchmark, that means the outlook is positive. And as you can see, there is some sort of stable trend throughout the year. But in February 2020, it dropped down to 27.5. So what this means is people are waiting the crisis to pass in order to go on with their spending decisions. And that just makes sense. I mean, I'm also holding up some key spending decisions, as everyone does. And this is how an economic crisis starts, basically. If this theme persists, we should brace for the impact, I would say. And corporate woes, as you would know, the airline industry has been very hardly hit. This is only an example. This is Scandinavian Airlines. They have laid off 90% of their workforce. Around 10,000 people have been laid off. And this is only the beginning, because tourism and airline industries have been the first to get hit. But next in line are the retail, and probably manufacturing will be hit because retail sales are lower. And this might start a chain reaction that could trigger an economic crisis. And I should also add, I have been trying. I have given this presentation, a similar version of it, 1 month ago, and people have been seeing the virus as the worst of the worst. But I think we should also remember an economic crisis might be just as deadly. Not in terms of, so for example, in virus, if virus kills someone, we can identify the cause behind it. But if someone dies of hunger, unemployment, and stuff, we cannot tell the economic crisis is the cause that's behind the downfall of this person. But it is indeed. So we should be careful also of the economic crisis that looms ahead after this virus. And I would like to add some insight, put you into the shoes of the politicians. What do policymakers have to decide in terms of such crises? It seems to us a little simple, but when you have to have a balancing act between virus prevention and economic crisis, there are some really hard decisions to make. So how does our economic machine work? So this is a reverse triangle. It builds on trust first. People should be trusting in their future, and they will not have to scavenge for food. They will have sufficient, ample provisions of food everywhere, and they will be employed, etc. That builds on trust. And then on free trade, people should be able to trade their goods freely. And then on, we have the global supply chains, which must everything work. The devices that we're using now to have Zoom, the calls, etc., they all depend on global supply chains. Nothing that you use today is produced in one country. So that is very essential for our global economy, as you'd already know. So, I mean, I cannot see your faces. Last time I did this presentation, the virus crisis was not in full swing, in Turkey at least. So I could have it delivered to people in person. So I would ask you to do it back home. You can raise your hands. I know quarantine could be a little depressing. So that could be a little socializing activity, that you raise your hands in your room by yourself. So I would like you to decide if you agree or disagree with the following statement. Factories and workplaces should remain closed to reduce transmission. If you agree or disagree. People agreed mostly in the last one. And if you agree, this is what you have. Empty streets. And as you can see, this was from Reuters, I think. Coronavirus impact spreads the European auto plant and could hit GM truck production. And it did. So if you close down these factories and workplaces, you disrupt the global supply chain, which in turn disrupts the whole economy. Free trade. So free trade should be conducted with the exception of goods that do not possess a threat to the public, like illegal drugs and arms. Most of the people disagreed with this. I think Turkish crowds are not the best proponents, best advocates of free trade. But yeah, I don't know about you guys. In the end, you have countries banning the export of medical products like masks, disinfectants, and so on. And Asian countries, especially China, it has been one of the biggest medical suppliers of the world. In Turkey, around, I think, 50% of the whole masks came from China. But when the crisis started, Chinese companies actually took back what they sold at higher prices to supply the ones in China. And now I think India, Turkey, Malaysia, and Indonesia have already banned the export of masks and essential medical products. And now countries like US and European countries are facing a shortage in supply. And that is also a big problem. So this is also another thing that policymakers have to decide each and every day. And trust. This is one of the most controversial topics, I think. News that erode trust towards the state and the economy should be restricted during the outbreak. Agree or disagree? I could not have a clear consensus on this with my previous crowd. But if you do publish news, this is what you have. This is the global panic that's been drawing the economies towards, could be even recession. This is the reason behind people hoarding food, people hoarding toilet paper for some unfathomable reason in Australia and other countries. This is just drawing people to irrationality, because I mean, hoarding toilet paper does not protect you very much against the virus. However, there is a line between this. Where should we draw that line? How much do we trust the state to hold on information that we think is essential? And how, until what point the state should hide, should reveal the truth? These are very hard questions that policymakers have to decide every day, and they should also have to strike a balance between how much they have been trusted by the population and how much can they stop the economic impact. I'm open to any questions I'm going through. And also a piece of advice from my side. So we should all take these news with a grain of salt and ask the question, does it all have to do with the virus? So my expertise in development is automotive industry. I have been working in automotive industry during the last 2 masters that I did. And I've been seeing such news reports. So heating reverse, coronavirus sends China car sales plunging, or China auto sales plunge in February amid virus shutdown. This is true. However, it was not entirely due to the virus. So as you can see, this is another headline from, as you can see, December 12th, 2019. China auto sales have been in decline for the last 3 years. It has been, the market has been contracting for a long while. And of course, the virus, as it affects everything, as it affects the entire economy, affects auto sales as well. But we should not see the virus wherever we look at. There has been some other underlying reasons, underlying trends before, and now the virus is just triggering a bigger reaction to this. So I would advise everyone to take everything with a grain of salt and not put the virus at the cause of everything. In terms of sustainability, so Sustainavistas is a sustainability initiative, and I would like to share my pessimistic opinions about the sustainability and whether there's a shift underway. So to the right, you can see a map of NO2 density in China. As you can see, to the left is January 1st and 20th. That was before the virus crisis has been made public. It was ongoing, but the state made it public afterwards. So you can see there's a huge concentration around the industrial bases of Chongqing. To the right, you can see Shanghai. To the south, you can see Hong Kong, and to the north, you can see the industrial base of around Beijing and Dongbei, the northeast. But after the virus crisis, around February 10th and 25th, you can see a total reduction. This has also been due to Chinese New Year, because during that time, no factories work at all. But afterwards, normally they would spike because they would have to keep up. They would have to make up for the lost production due to the holidays. But it has not been the case because they have been also forced to be shut down. And now, in overall China, I think the rates of going back to work is around 60 to 70%, and it still hasn't kept up with the previous emission density. But is this going to be a long-term shift that will help us in sustainability? My short answer is no. Why? Because people are now reconsidering their spending decisions, but for how long will they keep on doing that? So the virus will eventually pass. This is not the Armageddon. This is not the apocalypse. It will soon pass. I hope also soon enough. After that, people will be going on, I believe, I hope, will be resuming with their daily economic activities. And for example, if you want to buy a car right now, it's probably not the best time for you to do so because you cannot predict the future. But after 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, you can go on with that decision if you really want to do that spending decision. And this, I think, could be an exogenous shock, a short-time external shock that came to our economy, that affects our economic decisions, but it will not leave a lasting impact, I believe. For it to give a lasting impact, actually, would be an economic crisis. And I'm not sure if the sustainability crowd would wish for an economic crisis to reduce emissions. However, that could actually help with the emissions, because an economic crisis, as you would also know, would mean a reduction in economic activity, also manufacturing and so on. And that would give a more long-lasting impact. But then think about the 2008 economic crisis. It's reduced the emissions in a significant way, but then on, we kept on with the same mentality and same industrialization drive that we always have, and the emissions have been increasing ever since. And this might leave some sort of impact for the next year or so, next 2 years, depending on how severe the economic crisis will be. However, I do not see a long-term shift or a change in mentality in terms of sustainability. So conclusion, what do we need to expect? Epidemiologically, we should expect it to get worse before it gets better. Because, as we talked about it, the quarantine measures take a while to show effects, and also herd immunity takes a while to develop. But it will eventually get better. So we should be a little more positive about everything, epidemiologically at least. However, economically, I would say we should expect it to get worse before it gets even worse, because this is triggering a chain reaction in the economy that could leave us in a deep recession, in a deep economic crisis that could affect our lives for the next 5-10 years. I'm not sure if you can see the video. Do we need to panic? That is the question. That has been the question I've been asking myself. Can you see the video?
It seems like it, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Ma che cosa sta succedendo? Manco quando è scoppiata la seconda guerra mondiale c'era stato un panico così.
So as you can see, this I believe would be called the boomer generation now in the youngsters' internet. They have been a little more tougher than I guess. They have been expecting us to be a little bit tougher as well. Don't forget, World War II killed around 30 million people, and he has been saying, asking us to be a little more rational. Hoarding food and preparing ourselves to be better for this crisis at the expense of others is not a very rational move and is not good for the overall of the whole economy or the society. So I would say we all need to be a little bit like this Italian grandpa. And to conclude my presentation, so epidemics in 21st century almost certainly always equals to pandemics, because now the mobility is much, much higher compared to the previous decades and centuries. So we should have a new approach toward outbreaks in 21st century, and we should be more prepared to such epidemics and find some way to make our economic machines work with these adverse conditions. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll be open to questions.
Erkan, thank you very much for the presentation, very insightful. I dive into your point of taking information with a grain of salt. We have a couple of questions from the audience, and that would be, is reporting of China outbreak in European media trustable, and are the shutdown measures really being lifted in China?
Can you repeat the question? Your voice has been a little on and off.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Yes. Is reporting of China outbreak in European media trustable? And are the shutdown measures really being lifted in China?
First of all, I guess the question is asking, is the European media reporting the crisis in China truthfully? Yeah. I think there has been always some distrust from the West towards China. I think there has been a little bit skewed reaction from the West. Because China, as WHO and many other health initiatives remarked, has been doing what should be done in terms of epidemics. They have been quarantining, they have been restricting the flow of people, and also Chinese population have made a great job of listening to the government and stopping their mobility. Because we are seeing in many countries, you have to establish forced quarantine measures in many countries. Like in Italy, it's illegal to go out now. In Turkey, they have been also considering this decision. In many cities of China, like Shanghai, that has never been under lockdown, this was not necessary. But I think the Western media has portrayed it in a way that Chinese government was actively keeping people home and pushing them to do something that they don't want to. I believe that has been the case with the Western media, and that is not correct in terms of China, because people have been compliant. And in terms of quarantine measures being lifted in China, yes, they are. I think in Hubei it's still the same, but now in Shanghai, I've been hearing from my friends and colleagues that life has been getting back to normal. Okay. People have been outside lately. I can see their Instagram posts and WeChat posts. It's a little envious actually, because I cannot go out here. But yeah, I think soon enough China will be done with this epidemic in terms of domestically. Now they're restricting the flow of people coming from outside, so importing the virus.
So let's also look at the vulnerability of supply chains, which obviously become very visible during such an event as what we're experiencing right now. So next disruptive event will come from somewhere else, or another virus. Wouldn't rewiring the way our economy works resilience in the future, ensure resilience in the future?
Wouldn't be wiring, sorry, can you come again with the lesson?
Wouldn't rewiring the way our economy works currently ensure resilience in the future?
Yes, exactly. That's what I was also proposing. We should develop some ways of keeping the economic machine running, because that it can also impact the daily life of people. But however, there is this ongoing debate on whether democratic regimes can actually pull this off. Because when you think about it, you need to have a very organized workforce. When you think about epidemiologically, to keep a factory running, the fact that you will have workers from every district of a town is a total nightmare. You can never ensure total quarantine for these people. What you can think of would be like a dream of an epidemiologist, and is the Soviet model, for example, where you have the buildings for workers that all come from the same place and go to the same place. You can actually enforce quarantine if someone gets sick, but if they are dispersed among many different areas of the town or the city, etc., it is a very hard way to do. So the countries around the world have to make some sort of decision in terms of what kind of model they will follow, and it also involved the big questions of the last century.
It's definitely a huge challenge going forward. Right.
It is.
Erkin, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.